Thanks for joining for this episode of the TechSpective Podcast. My guest this episode is Mickey Boodaei. So, Mickey, if you could introduce yourself, give a little bit of background on your company and what you're doing, and let's chat.
Thanks, Tony. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Transmit Security. We are basically an identity management company, really focusing right now on eliminating passwords. I'm based in Israel, been in cybersecurity for about 30 years now. So started 3 companies. The first one is Imperva. Was back in, I believe, 2001. And the second one was Trusteer, which is now part of IBM Security. And for the past almost 7 years now, it's Transmit Security.
Okay. Now, so Transmit Security, you say, is about 7 years old, or the 7-year effort. I will say I was not really aware of it until there was like the big funding news, in the last year. But it was really big funding news. I mean, I think that was one of the larger funding rounds that I've heard of, which seems to suggest that there's a lot of support, at least on the investor side, for getting rid of passwords.
Absolutely. We're seeing tremendous support and interest in getting rid of passwords. Actually, we started as an identity management company back 7 years ago, and really started because back in Trusteer, we were doing mostly fraud detection and financial malware detection for financial institutions. And when we tried to connect our fraud capabilities with authentication and authorization, this is where we noticed that the architecture itself that organizations have today doesn't really work, doesn't really support it. And we decided to kind of like think about identity slightly differently, something that brings together authentication, authorization, and fraud or account takeover, all the other aspects, and also privacy. They're all kind of connected, and they do not live in silos. And that's how we started. And we started working mostly with very large enterprises like the big banks, financial institutions, then moving on to telco providers, healthcare, and retailers. And eventually what we kind of like felt, this was probably, I would say, about 2 years ago, is that the technology and the conditions for getting rid of passwords are finally here, and we can start taking this more seriously. So we kind of like created this entire line of product around getting rid of passwords and allow organizations to. When I'm saying getting rid of passwords, it's kind of like important because we're all familiar with fingerprint authentication, face authentication, but typically they sit alongside passwords. So you can either authenticate with that or authenticate with passwords. So the passwords are still there, and there are a lot of issues definitely on the security side unless you actually completely eliminate passwords. So that's our focus, that's our differentiation, allowing you to even delete the passwords from your user's database, which is a very big step.
Okay, so let's get into that. So, before we kicked off, I had mentioned, going back, I don't remember the exact year, but I want to say it was about 20 years ago that, Bill Gates made the declaration that, the password was dead or dying or whatever. Obviously, it's 20 years later, and I have as many or more passwords as I had back then. And I've gone through all of the iterations of, length and strength and complexity and such, and I will say, I guess, note to all the hackers out there who might want to attack me. I have, over time kind of developed this. Okay, this is a bank account, or this is a credit card account, or this is an investment account. I will create a unique password for that. But then I have all these like various websites. Like every website wants me to register and create a password, and for most of those, I'm just using the same stupid password because I'm like, I don't really care if I don't have the mental capacity to maintain 75 different complex passwords, and most of those websites I don't care about. Most of those websites I'm actually never going to log into again, which I guess creates a problem of its own. That there are companies that are asking me to create a profile and create a password just to get access to something that I really only want one time. And now there's this zombie account sitting out there forever, just waiting to get hacked.
Yeah, it's interesting what you're saying, because there are actually two implications to passwords. The first one is obviously security, and we can talk about that. But the second one is really the business aspect of passwords. So you mentioned organizations asking you to create an account just to log in, just to check what they're offering, perhaps make a single purchase. And that's really where passwords and the business actually meet. And the impact of passwords over the business is something that is overlooked by a lot of the organizations. And the main reason why it's overlooked, I think, is because up until recently, there were really no real alternatives to passwords. So if you had to create an account for a user, if you want the user to return, so you want to kind of like let them in every time they come in, you need to create an account, you need to create a password for that. There are no other alternatives. So we're kind of pushing users toward that. And because there were no alternatives, no one actually measured what's the impact of asking users to create a password on the business itself. And we did that actually, recently over the past 12 months or so with a few surveys that we did with consumers to check if there is a strong link between the business and passwords. And we found surprisingly strong correlation between the two. So, I can give you a couple of examples. The first one would be that when you're opening an account and you ask a customer a prospect at that point, to create a password, there is a great chance that many of them will just walk away. Unless they're totally convinced that they want to transact with you, that they want to work with you, that they need your services, there is a very good chance that they'll walk away the moment you ask them to create an account, because they're fed up with passwords and accounts. And as you said, you have so many accounts that you're not using. You just don't want your identity to be stored in all these places that you don't know, you don't trust, you don't know whether you're going to use them again. And the second is actually, let's say that you did decide to open an account and provide a password, you did a single purchase. And then after a while, you come back to that website. Could be because of, let's say, a promotion you get over email. You go to the website, they ask you for the password. You said before that you don't even remember these passwords. You don't give, a lot of attention to that. So at that point, they ask you to authenticate. You don't remember the password. You need to go through a forgot my password process. And it turns out that more than 90% of consumers would rather abandon the website at that point than go through a forgot my password process. So unless, once again, they're absolutely sure, 100% certain that this is a website they want to work with, they'll just walk away. And the impact on the business is huge, because these are the prospects that you want to turn into consumers. These are the users that you want to make into to turn into returning users, and you're just losing them right there because of the password.
Well, and that password reset process, in a lot of cases, also adds a potential, attack vector. It adds, because it's just, okay, well, we're going to send you an email or we're going to send you an SMS text, and both of those things are hijackable on some level. So, not only is it a situation where I don't care enough about that company or that website to remember what the password was from 3 years ago, and now I'm trying to log in again, and that's a pain in the ass for me. But in the meantime, pretty much anyone could have come along and just tried to, reset the password on my behalf, and so that creates a problem as well.
That's correct. Password, just to add to that, password reset is one of the main attack vectors today for account takeover.
Yeah. So you mentioned about how I have an iPhone. I had an iPhone when it was Touch ID. I have an iPhone with Face ID. I really appreciate it, but you made the point that Apple does it requires you to create a PIN as the backup, because I don't know, let's say you get in a car accident and you're now your face is all bandaged up and you can't get in. So you do so I guess my question is sort of like, okay, how do you get around that? Like if you remove that entirely, how do I authenticate if my face is no longer available?
Yeah, so I think we've been through a lot since the first Touch ID technology was released. That was probably 6 years ago, and at first the technology itself was really not that reliable. We all remember trying to log in and it didn't really work, and if the finger was wet or something like that. And then, but I think that over the past 6 or 7 years, the technology has made a lot of progress. Definitely with fingerprint authentication, but also with face authentication. So the new sensors in all the phones. I hardly find myself locked out of my phone because I cannot authenticate, even it's in dark conditions or with my sunglasses on.
Sometimes I find it works better in dark conditions, especially like with Windows Hello. Like sometimes if it's too outside in the sun, it actually doesn't work as well. It all and because you have to for not you, I assume you understand, but for people in general, you have to understand that Face ID and Windows Hello are not looking at a picture of your face. So the fact that your face is bright and shiny and you can see your face on the screen and stuff, that's not really relevant because it's doing all kinds of infrared stuff that bright light actually kind of messes it up.
That's correct. And, also in terms of fingerprint authentication, I'm sure you remember, the first generation of fingerprint readers in, I don't remember, Lenovo desktop. It was really painful to use. You had to scroll your finger. Most of the times you didn't read it correctly. You had to do this over and over again. And
then now, so I forget which model, not the current model of Surface laptop, but I was reviewing the previous model of the Surface laptop, and the model that I had the fingerprint sensor to log in, and it didn't have a Windows Hello camera capable camera. It just had the fingerprint sensor, but that thing was lightning fast, and almost to the point that I questioned the security of it, because I was like, are you telling me you can actually tell that is my fingerprint and only my fingerprint in the 0.1 seconds it took me to just tap this little sensor?
There is a debate around the usability of security, especially around authentication, that if it's too easy, people, especially consumers, may think that it's not that secure. So it's how much friction do we need to add? And sometimes people think, or organizations think, they need to add artificial friction so users think that the account is secured. But I think it's a matter of education, and people are now are much more comfortable with biometric authentication. By the way, there is also still a lot of confusion about the biometric themselves and the privacy around biometric. And I think this is a really important point, because not everyone understands yet that in terms of privacy, the biometric authentication methods that we're using today with the iPhone or Windows machines and Macs is even more secure and more private than definitely all the other methods, especially passwords. The biometrics never leave the device. The biometrics are stored in a specific dedicated hardware or coprocessor that sits in the device, and only that coprocessor has access to the actual biometrics. So all the comparison is done on the client side. So if you're authenticating to a specific website, that website doesn't know anything about your biometrics, doesn't do any biometric authentication, and doesn't collect any biometric data on you. So it's much more secure, much more private than anything else.
Yeah, I am not going to be able to repeat effectively what I was told, but I had a discussion with someone, I want to say it was last year at RSA, with a vendor. We were talking about password versus PIN, and I was trying to make the argument of, like, isn't that a semantic distinction? Either way, I have to remember something and I have to use it to log in. That's just, the PIN is just a numeric password. And he was like, no. Because the password is being authenticated against something on a third party. It's going across, and the PIN is stored on the device. So the PIN is just authenticating you on the device. And I was like, okay, I guess that's a fair distinction.
Yeah, it's the argument of centralized authentication versus decentralized authentication or local authentication. So basically, it's whether the website that authenticates you as a centralized database of your credentials. And if that's true, it means that anyone, basically from any device, any location, could go with your credentials and authenticate against that database. And even with biometrics, there are certain methods of centralized biometrics. They're not that common today, but they're still there, where you're authenticating against a centralized database. So anyone who's trying to spoof your identity, let's say your face, could try and do that against the centralized database. When you go to decentralized authentication or local authentication, the credentials are stored on the device itself. So first of all, in order to use the credentials, you need access to the device itself. So if you look at two-factor authentication, that's something you have, that's the device itself. And then if you're using a PIN, that's something so you're using a PIN. Obviously, if you use the same PIN code across all the different devices you have, then if I look over your shoulder and I look at your PIN code and I have access to one of your devices, I could use that. So I would argue it's less secure than biometrics, obviously, but it's still better than the centralized world of credentials.
Okay. So what is your approach? Like what makes transmit security unique? Like, how are you working to change this equation?
Well, I think the big challenge with biometrics is the fact that users have today more than just one device. And if you look at centralized biometrics, as we discussed earlier with passwords, it doesn't matter how many devices you have. You have a single password. You can come from any device you want and log in. But with decentralized authentication, with biometrics, device biometrics, they're tied to a specific device. So what you really need to do is to manage the different devices that each one of your users have, and to manage the binding of the biometrics of on this device to the identity of the user. and then be able to go and say, you know what, this is Tony, even though it's coming from his Windows machine or iPhone or tablet, we know that this is the same person. And keep in mind that the website itself doesn't really have access to your biometrics. So they need to rely on some sort of mechanism to say that all these devices are actually belong to Tony. And what you really want to avoid is a lengthy and inconvenient process where you bind each of these devices to your identity, because really what we're seeing is that a single user may have like 4 different devices and change devices on almost a yearly basis now. So you don't want that process across all devices you have, across all the websites you're accessing. So think about the numbers, right? It's like you're probably accessing 200 different websites for different purposes, and you're changing a device, and now you need to rebind this device against all these 200 websites, and that's a huge pain. And if you want to do this securely, you need multiple factors of authentication that are not your biometrics to gain the same level of trust in the device that you had before. So it's becoming a real big problem. What we're doing is we're allowing you to enroll once and do that across all the websites, all the applications that are leveraging the transmit technology. So you, as a user, as an end user, you only enroll once. And then if you have multiple devices, we know how to transfer the trust between all these devices, so you don't need to enroll each one of them separately. So let's say you have 4 devices across 200 websites, right? That's 800 enrollments that you need to go through. That's a lot. And once you set a new device, that's another 200 enrollments that you need to go through. And with our technology, you get rid of all of that. You enroll once, you use it across all. We take care of all the security aspects, and we make it really accessible, really easy to all the websites, all the application to consume that as a service with a simple API, basically. So, in a matter of, let's say, hours technically, you can get rid of your entire database of passwords and replace it with a passwordless solution across all your users and all your applications.
Okay, so two things on that. Number one, would it be fair to compare that or draw an analogy to like certificate authorities? You know, basically you're a proxy for trust. You're a third party where I say I trust you, the company says they trust you, and together we decide that we're gonna rely on you as the trusted source of authentication.
It's a fair comparison. I would say that what we're doing, because we're not really managing the biometrics, as we said, the biometrics are managed on the device itself. We're managing the cryptographic keys that are tied to the biometrics and the process of validating these keys against each one of the devices, and then linking them to a single person, single identity, and providing that as a single input to the website that is calling us. So in terms of security, what we are doing, or what we're offloading from all these websites, is the need to deal with all the cryptography, all the linking, all the understanding of a user across multiple devices from the website and the application owners.
You're also taking away the burden and the responsibility from a compliance perspective and from just a pure security perspective of, that's a huge burden. Like you have all this personal information that you're in charge of, for these customers. And if you screw up and your password database is somehow exposed or compromised, that's on you. So if an organization chooses to work with Transmit Security instead, they not only get rid of the kind of the administrative overhead, but they get rid of the kind of security responsibility and burden to some extent as well.
The regulatory aspect of passwords and identity is massive, right? It's like the liability aspect of it for organizations is something no one should take lightly. And the fact that you're actually getting rid of passwords and not liable anymore to the private information of your consumers, of your users, and even employees, that's a big win for organizations. So we're definitely offloading this, but in a much more secure way. It's not like we're taking the passwords and putting them somewhere else and taking responsibility of the passwords. We're replacing that with much more secure and private technologies, and we're taking the burden off the website of having to manage that. Because from a management perspective, that's much more complex than managing passwords. And we do that, but from a security, from a compliance perspective, that's a huge win for all organizations, and definitely from the business aspect that we discussed earlier. Because if you look at the problems that we've mentioned, one of them is I don't want to create an account, to create a password. I don't want to reset my password if I forgot it. If you take these problems away, the amount of business that organizations can save or create is massive. We're talking hundreds of percents, right? It's really a big thing business-wise. If you can go to a website that you haven't seen before, and you want to transact with them, and all you need to do is touch the fingerprint sensor, or look at the camera, and that's it. You don't need to do anything else. That's a great win from a business perspective.
One of the things that's become more common in the past few years is, I go to a website, it asks me to create an account, but I have the option of I can either create the account using my email address and creating a password, or I can just click on the login with Facebook or login with Apple. Where it's basically federating the identity or authenticating it through an API from those sources. How is what Transmit doing? Is it similar, or how is it different or better than that?
It simplifies things, both for consumers and for the organization itself, for the website itself. Login with Google, login with Facebook, login with LinkedIn, login with all the other options. The problem is that you can't really do with one, and you have to create multiple options for your users, and then you need to take into account users that don't want to use any of these, so you need to offer the password alternative as well. So you go to this website, sometimes you see like 6-7 different ways to log in, including passwords. And one of the outcomes of that is that consumers get confused, not when they log in for the first time, but when they come in for the second time.
I was literally going to go there next. I was going to say the problem with that is now when I go back to the site, I'm like, well, crap, I don't remember. Did I create a password? Did I log in with Apple? How did I log in? And then, so now I don't recall how I got into the site in the first place.
Exactly. And that's even a bigger problem, because when you're doing login with Google, with many of these websites, they automatically create an account for you. So you do login with Google, they create an account for you. You come back after a month, you don't remember which one you used. You do login with Facebook, they create a new account for you. So you have multiple accounts, you don't know where your data is, like your previous work, and it creates a problem not just for the consumer, but for the organization itself, that they have multiple accounts for the same persona and they're losing work that their customers did. So we find this kind of like very confusing, and there is no way to consolidate all that into a single experience. What we're saying is that, okay, let's leave all that aside and allow users a very single, simple way to authenticate with their fingerprint face. That's the future. It's supported in all new devices. Most of the devices support it today. And that's, you don't need to overthink the login process. And from the organization side, they always get the same identity for the user, regardless of the different devices that the user is using.
Okay. Well, you know, I like I said, I'm all for that, and you know, and I have appreciated, you know, even the steps along that path. Like, you know, I think we have made progress in terms of, you know, like I said, I will use Windows Hello or even a PIN to log into a Windows machine. But at least once I've done that, once I've authenticated to the machine, you know, Windows is storing all these passwords, and I don't have to try to remember everything all the time. You know, I authenticated once to the machine does the rest for me. You know, I have basically the same thing with my iPhone. You know, I'm authenticating to the device. It has all these stored passwords. You know, the problem comes up when I go somewhere where, you know, where the password's not stored, or actually a big problem, which I actually just ran into this week, is when you have a situation where you're forced to reset your password for some reason. You know, they say, okay, well, you know, whatever, it's 90 days, it's 120 days, whatever the policy is. And they're like, well, we need you to reset your password, but in order to do so, you need to give us your old password first. And I'm like, I don't remember what the hell my old password was. Like, I've been using Microsoft and Apple to remember my password for me. I don't know what it is. And so then I end up having to go through the password reset process in order to reset my password. You know, like.
Yeah, and you know what? It's even repetitive, because let's say you're using Windows and you know, iPhone, right? So you have Windows, whatever you use there, remembering your passwords. So you then go to your iPhone, you try to go to the same website, the same application. They're asking for the password, it's not there. So you go through a reset my password, forgot my password, you create a new password, you don't even remember it because you know the iPhone is going to remember it. So that's cool, right? It's like, you know, I got this covered. You then go back to Windows and they're trying to log you in with the previous password. Right. So now it's like, oh crap, what do I do? You need to go through reset your password again. And you reset the password. Now Windows remember the password, iPhone doesn't, right? So it's like it's a big problem. What we actually saw is that many users are kind of limiting themselves to a specific device per website or application, just because that device remembers their password and they don't want to go through that process on another device.
Or even the specific browser. You know, so like I use multiple browsers in Windows, and you know, most of the time I'm in Edge, but then I'll go into Chrome and I'll try to visit a site and it doesn't remember, you know, that password's not stored there. The password is associated with Edge. And, you know, now I have to go through that same, you know, process of, okay, well, now I need to also store the password in Chrome.
Yeah, and that's a great business for the you know, for the browser, because it creates stickiness. But for the website itself, it's horrible, because you know, they want you to access their service from all devices. Let's say you get a promotional email on your iPhone, you click on it, you try to log in, you don't remember the password. There is a good chance you'll just, you know, delete or ignore the email and move on. That's a big problem. What you want to create is a scenario in which you go from any device, you read your email, you get a text message, you whatever it is, you see, you even see an advertisement, you click on it, you're already logged in, regardless of the device. And you know, also when you're coming from new devices, which is a huge pain.
Yeah, and I've actually experienced that recently as well. I don't think I deleted it or didn't do it, but I got an email like on my iPhone, clicked it, it went and it was like, yeah, I don't have the login info there. And so, I mean, as I recall, I eventually got to it, but it was something in my mind where I was like, well, instead of going through the pain of trying to figure out how to log in here, I just need to remember next time I'm at my desk to click on this so I can get into it from Windows, because Windows knows how to log me in.
Exactly. And once for some reason it's deleted from Windows, that's where, the pain really starts.
Yeah. All right. Well, I mean, it would be great to see the end of passwords. And like I said, I think we have made some progress, but to all the points we've discussed, it's like the progress kind of comes with caveats of its own. And there are still certainly issues and hurdles. And I still get password, reset requests all the time. Actually, one of the things I was going to say that I've noticed is there are a few sites, I want to say Netflix and PayPal stand out to me that do this, where to kind of combat that thing you were talking about you reset your password on one and then it doesn't work on the other, where you can reset your password and then it asks you, okay, do you want to log out of all other instances, which would then force you to use the new password for everything, or leave them? And so, like, I've reset the password, and then but then everyone else, like all the devices in my house that are already logged into Netflix under the old password, they're fine until or unless you get to the point where for some reason you log out of there and now you have to log back in and you don't know what the password is again.
Yeah. Look, I really think that the technology to get rid of passwords is really, it's available, it's ready. The interesting part about it is that identity is typically considered like a very complex domain, which means that whenever you need to do a project in identity, whether it's authentication, authorization, account takeover, it's going to be a really complex process for the organization, really painful, really expensive. And I think that for the first time, we have the opportunity to introduce technologies that not only make security better, not only make usability better, but also get rid of all the complexity in identity and specifically around authentication. And, organizations could achieve that very easily today, and it's going to be even easier in the future.
Yeah. Well, and one of the things I found very interesting about our conversation here is I have almost always viewed the password issue from the consumer side, from the side of, I have to deal with remembering passwords. I have to figure out, do I use a password management tool? Do I, write the passwords down in a note on my, or an Excel spreadsheet or something in my computer? Like, how am I supposed to keep track of all this stuff? And I'm viewing it from the pain points of the consumer, but you've made a lot of good points about the pain points from the business side as well, and really kind of making the case for why it's in the business's best interest to get rid of the passwords as well.
From the business perspective, it's definitely not just security. Security is really what everyone is focused on. And obviously, like, we mentioned before, the evolution of password, right? It started with really simple passwords, right? 1, 2, 3, 4. And then everyone used 1, 2, 3, 4. So we started, okay, let's set minimum length. Let's make sure they mix characters. Let's make sure they add special character. Let's make sure they change their passwords. And then let's make sure they don't reuse the passwords they already used before. So it's like patching the password almost over and over and over again, to the point where it's not secure, but also not usable anymore. So people find hacks, right? They find, okay, we'll use the same password over and over again across all, all the websites we have. When we ask to change a password, we're just going to change a single character or add a single character at the end of it. So,
I lived that. So I was when I was a network admin back in the day. I was a one-man IT department for this for a .com, and I implemented a password policy where I was like, all right, well, we're gonna change the passwords every 60 days, or actually I think it was 30 days. We're going to change passwords every 30 days, and it had to have uppercase, lowercase, and a number. And I found out a few months later when I went to go help someone solve a problem with their thing, that what she had done was she just used whatever the month was and like the number 1. And it's just that so every month it was just, all right, well, we're going, and because I also had you can't reuse the passwords, but I think I only had it for like, you can't reuse like the last, 12 passwords. So basically you could do January 1, February 1, March 1, April 1, and get through the year and then start over and use those passwords again. So it's like, people find a way to work around whatever your policy is. And there's a lot of debate still about what's the right best way to do that. Like, is it really more secure to have an 8-character password that requires you to have special characters in upper and lowercase and numbers, so you're adding all these various complexities, or is it more secure to just require that you have at least a 30-character password regardless of what characters you use?
It's a fair debate, and there are like pros and cons to to each approach, but I would say it's an irrelevant debate today because we can just get rid of that. And, we spoke about the business aspect of it, but it's really like, think about where a consumer or user meets the password. It's when they open an account, and it's when they really want to log in, really want to get access to your website or service. So at a point where you need the least friction with the user, when you want to make the biggest impact in terms of customer experience, you're doing the opposite. You're just making the the initial experience for them with your service and the ongoing experience for them every time they try to access your service as something that is stressful. And it's actually, we measure that. It's very stressful for people not to remember their passwords. So that moment where you sit in front of the login page and you're trying to figure out what was the password I was using here or I used here before, that's very stressful. You can actually see their pulse going up. And that's not the way you want to start your engagement with your consumers. So it has to be easier, has to be more relaxed, has to be more convenient for users, and that's the basic of it in terms of the business aspect.
Awesome. So, it's going to be next week before I get this, online. But this week Black Hat's going on. So there are people in Las Vegas for Black Hat and DEF CON. I had really hoped to be there. Like, I was kind of looking forward to finally getting back to a security conference, but ultimately was like, nah. The way things are going right now, I don't think I want to be in Las Vegas.
Yeah,
but I got my fingers crossed that we'll hopefully get our stuff together before RSA, and I'd really like to be able to get to RSA in person.
Yeah, so do I. I miss traveling, and it's actually, I really wanted to go to Black Hat, but Israel has just put more restrictions right now because of COVID. So when you get back, you need to go to 7 days of self-isolation. And I was like, no, I'm not going to do that. So,
right.
Yeah.
And especially like, it's there are certain hotspots here, and Las Vegas is actually one of them. I mean, I live in Texas, which is one of them. Florida is the worst. But Florida and actually, I'm not really sure how things are in Nevada. I was going to say Florida and Texas, it's self-inflicted. It's just bad governing. I'm not sure what's going on in Nevada. I just know that last time I checked, they had pretty low vaccination rates, and it's a tourist hub. So you've got hundreds of thousands of people coming from all over the world, and commingling in one spot, and so that's kind of bound to be a hot spot of on some level. Whether we're talking about COVID or the flu or the common cold. I mean, it's just it was already a regular thing for those of us who go to Black Hat and RSA. There was always the conference flu. It's just a common and known thing that you go to a conference with 50,000 people and you come back with a cold or a flu or something, because that's how it works.
Yeah, I remember back in RSA, it was a couple of years ago, I think. There were a lot of people got COVID because of that.
Yeah. Yeah, that was 2 years ago. That was the last thing I went to. I mean, because I remember they were on the fence about canceling it.
Yeah.
Or and they decided to go forward, and they just put out hand sanitizer stations every 50 feet. And there were some people in masks, but not really. Masks weren't really a thing yet. It was just a lot of hand sanitizer. But yeah, and then that was really kind of my first, the beginning of me hearing about it, though. So I wasn't even really concerned that much then. But then it was the week after that everything shut down, because I was supposed to. I came back from RSA. I was supposed to go to Austin to go, do some different things, meet with some people the following week, and then everything went on lockdown, and I basically didn't leave my house for 9 months.
Yeah. So. I do miss the conferences and these face-to-face meetings. That's for sure.
Yeah. All right. Well, fingers crossed. If things cool off a bit and we can go to RSA in person, we can go grab a beer together.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, thank you for joining me and taking the time. And I will talk to you later.
Thank you, Tony. It's been a pleasure.
I appreciate you investing your time to listen to the podcast, but I also invite you to engage on social media. Please go like our Facebook page and follow @TechSpective on Twitter and Instagram. You can feel free to let me know what you like, let me know what you don't like, let me know if you love it, let me know if it sucks, and let me know what products you'd like to see reviewed or what questions you'd like to see answered in future posts.